Yet, on the shore, there was not a single soul behind them. Shilian had carried Feng Xin on him the entire journey, and the moment he saw the reflection, he immediately swung the sword back. That black shadow was clearly stabbed, yet it felt like a ball of waves was stabbed instead. It broke up into a series of ripples before it disappeared on the spot. Hua Chang also raised his brows slightly, glancing in the direction of where that black shadow disappeared, and knitted his brows. Soon after, more and more shadowy figures appeared in the reflection in the water. Their blanched faces and pale hands were the only things eye-catching in the blackened night. Shilian unsheathed his sword and swept, shouting, "General Pei, go to the water and look at the reflection. The reflection in the water can reveal those creatures." If they weren't in a demon lair, those little ghosts wouldn't be able to come near a heavenly official at all. Pei Ming wasn't able to see the enemy earlier, yet now that he could observe through the water, he watched the reflection and easily took care of the crowd of ghosts surrounding him, with but 2 swings of his sword. Shawudu also finally noticed the strange reflections, and he knelt by the water, shouting into the lake with his head down, "Ching Shwan, are you there?" That water was black, that iron prison was also black, and it melded into one. It was difficult to make out details, only that one hand was white. Suddenly, a face appeared between the iron bars, and it was Ching Shwan. He didn't seem to be able to see Shawudu outside the iron prison, and his expression was one of chilling terror. His 2 hands clutched the iron bars, desperately trying to squeeze his head out, looking like he was crying for help, yet not a single sound passed through. He didn't yell for very long before suddenly several shriveled, decaying hands grabbed at his head, pulled at his face, his neck, his shoulders, and yanked him down. Seeing this, Shawudu cursed and was about to jump right into the water when Pei Ming pulled him back. "Water Master Shang," he said, "you can't. Can't you tell that this is a trap? You can't manipulate the waters of the South Sea, and as a water god, if you enter someone else's water territory, aren't you just asking to be butchered?" Shawudu patted his shoulder and said only this, "Then help me guard the outside." Then he shoved him away and leapt into the black water lake. The moment he entered the water, he sank right down. Pei Ming called out, "Water Master Shang." But he couldn't follow because he knew that this lake was most likely a boundary. Much like the mechanism set up in ancient graves, outsiders could open the tomb gates and intrude. Once inside, the doors would close automatically and would not open from the inside, leaving the intruders to die trapped within. It would be hard not to assume that this boundary had a similar mechanism. Shilian called out, "General Pei, don't go in. There's a corpse right by your feet. Hurry back to the beach and build a coffin to prepare for evacuation. I'll go in." "Your Highness, will you be all right?" Pei Ming asked. Shilian responded, "Your spiritual powers are cut down coming to this place, so we're equals now. I'm more experienced than you are in fighting with bare fists." Pei Ming then glanced at Hua Chang standing next to Shilian and recalled that he could float on the water surface, so the 2 of them were much more useful than he would be here. Without further ado, he picked up the corpse of the little ghost and rushed out of the woods. Shilian turned to face Hua Chang. "Sanlang, will you lend me a little spiritual power again? Just a little bit is enough," he said. Without a word, Hua Chang gave the small of his back a gentle pat. When Shilian swung Feng Xin again, a giant pillar-like white light flashed, and every little ghost on the scene was killed by the strike. Shelian was speechless for a moment, and instantly sheathed the sword. "I'm off," he said. The two jumped into the water at the same time. However, at the bottom of the Blackwater Lake, other than the abnormally cold lake water, there wasn't anything strange. This water was also different from the ship-sinking waters of the Blackwater Demon Lair. One could float, not unlike a normal lake. Shelian reached the bottom, but there wasn't any strange mechanism to be seen, and he didn't see Lord Windmaster or Lord Watermaster either. He knitted his brows and mused for a moment before he swam back up. Moments later, Shelian broke through the surface and sucked in a few breaths, wiping wetness off of his face. It was only then that he realized that the landscapes upon the shore had transformed. Next to the Blackwater Lake, there stood an iron prison, and it was the exact same one reflected in the waters earlier. However, other than the prison, everything else on the shoreside was still exactly the same. It was also overly quiet, adding to the haunting air of the place. Shawudu had already climbed ashore and was smashing the giant lock on the iron prison with a giant boulder. He was a heavenly official who controlled water. Now that he entered the domain of another who could control water, and he lost the ability to manipulate it, he was like a beast with fangs and claws removed. Shelian and Hua Chang climbed ashore. The moment Shawudu saw Shelian, his eyes lit up and he raised his hand. "A martial guard, thank God," he said. "Quick, use your martial guard ways to take care of this." Will everyone now understand the benefits of having a martial guard around? Shelian thought internally. He silently approached and gave the lock a kick, cracking it soundly. Another kick and the prison gates opened. Shawudu rushed to go in and cried, "Ching!" But before he even charged in, a crowd came rushing out instead, wailing and howling. Those people were all disheveled and unkempt, emaciated and gaunt. Their eyes blank, their ragged clothes covering nothing, revealing rows of ribs. They were so filthy, it was like they hadn't bathed in over 10 years. Their hands were swinging and grabbing randomly, pounding at their own chests and stopping in their steps. They roared and cried incoherently, exceedingly horrifying. They streamed out like a wave of polluted water, leaving Shawudu in petrified shock. However, they were only trying to escape. They didn't stick around to harass, and so even if Shawudu was momentarily stunned, he didn't care for them and continued to charge into the building. "Ching!" he shouted again, but before he could even make it a few steps, he staggered in his step and almost fell. The ground was extremely slippery. There was also a rotten stench emanating from within the iron prison that was hard to describe. Even Shelian, who was still outside, could smell it, and he held his breath. Shawudu thus covered his nose and mouth with his sleeve and continued to charge in, finally able to yell the full name. "Ching Shwan," he shouted. It was pitch black within the prison, and all around them was muffled sobbing and strange murmured chattering. Moments later, a weak voice came. "Go." Sure enough, Ching Shwan was sitting brokenly in the deepest part of the iron prison, leaning against a wall. On that wall was the sole tall window of the iron prison, and the moonlight leaking through the window illuminated his person, making him look as white as a sheet. He was surrounded by a number of filthy creatures. Some had rotten sores covering their entire bodies. Some were imitating the cries of a pig. Some were picking grain like they were chickens. Some were hugging Ching Shwan, wailing and calling him baby. All of them were insane. Ching Shwan had once been an esteemed heavenly official, and never once had he been in such a state. Shawudu immediately went up and shot out a blast. "Get lost," he shouted. "What kind of ghosts are these?" He and Shwan resembled each other, yet their auras were completely different. Although his spiritual power was cut down right now, his might was even more domineering, and those madmen scrambled away in fear. Shailen couldn't help but feel sympathy, and Shwan also chided. "Grr, don't fight. They're not little ghosts. They're all live people." Sure enough, although each of those figures looked more demonic than demons, when inspected closely, they were all, in fact, human. Shailen couldn't help but be taken aback. Why would the Blackwater demon Shwan lock up a bunch of these people here? He wondered. Shawudu, however, didn't care for them at all. He held up that longevity locket in one hand, grabbed hold of Ching Shwan's arm. "How did you come here? Where are you hurt?" he asked. Ching Shwan was really quite dirty, but other than a scratch on his leg that was bleeding a bit, there didn't seem to be much else. "I don't know how we got here," he said. "A wave surged and knocked us out, and when we came to, we were already here. This is just a small scratch. It's nothing serious. Ming Xiang's injuries are more severe." Only then did the others realize that Ming Yi was lying on the ground nearby, looking ashen, but not ashen from displeasure. Patches of purple and blue covered his face. Shailen asked, "What's happened to Lord Earthmaster?" "It seems like he was bitten by those creatures in the sea," Ching Shwan replied. "Those skeleton fish have green moss on their teeth and bones, and they're all poisonous. I gave him all the medicine I had on me, but..." he sighed. Shailen squatted down and was going to look over him carefully, but he almost fainted from the disgusting stench of the place. Looking around, there were some wooden buckets placed about, and those buckets were filled with swill, emanating an astringent and musty smell. There was the rotten stink of sores and blood, and the horrifying stench of chamber pots that hadn't been emptied for months. Shawudu couldn't tolerate it any longer. "Such a disgusting hobby," he said. "It seems that the ship-sinking Blackwater doesn't have any sense of class either. Ching Shwan, let's go." He pulled Ching Shwan up and started to drag him about, but Ching Shwan spoke up. "I'm fine. No need to assist me." Then he went to carry Ming Yi before slowly moving out of the iron prison. However, it was easier to come than to go. The boundary passage in the Blackwater Lake was already sealed shut. They entered the water a few times and emerged through the surface, but the scenery never changed, proving that they were truly kept within the boundary of the Blackwater Lake, unable to leave. "Where's General Pei?" Ching Shwan asked. "I made Pei Xiang stay outside," Shawudu responded. "He should be able to think of a way in." "I told General Pei to go build a coffin boat so that the moment we get out, we can evacuate," Shailen said. "If he's completed the coffin boat, then it's also fine if he goes back to report first before coming back for us," Shawudu said. However, Ming Yi was wounded. While they weren't sure how powerful the poison was, it was still better to leave as soon as possible, so they might not be able to wait that long. After some contemplation, Shailen said, "This Blackwater demon Shwan might live in seclusion out here in the sea, but there's no way he'd never leave. Surely he wouldn't have to cross an entire Blackwater demon lair every time he wants to go out." "You're very right," Shawudu said. "There must be a place on this island where one can cast the distance-shortening array." At first, Shawudu didn't particularly care for Shailen, but now that they were shouldering hardships together and Shailen had saved Ching Shwan time and time again, naturally, he now looked at him differently, and he agreed without any grousing. Just then, Ming Yi slightly raised a hand, and Ching asked, Ming Xiong, what do you want to say? Looking like he was trying to save strength, Ming Yi didn't speak and only raised that hand higher. The others looked to the direction of his raised hand and saw in the deep of the forest there stood a black, gloomy building. Ming Yi dropped his hand and croaked. That place, what's it for? Do you know? No, Shilian said. We didn't see it on the way here. Shawuru squinted and said, that must be the nether water manor of that Blackwater demon Shwan. In rumors, the residence of Blackwater demon Shwan was called the nether water manor. Making the decision, Shawuru said, let's go. He actually started walking toward the manor without any fear of retribution. Although it seemed tactless and rude under the current circumstances, what other choice did they have? If it could be said that they were spinning about in someone else's backyard earlier, then now they were about to go break in through someone else's front door. Shilin whispered to Hua Chang, Sanlang, if this is awkward for you, you don't need to come. However, Hua Chang also looked somber and said, quicken your pace, Coco. Leave here as soon as possible. Shilian nodded and stopped speaking. However, he could tell faintly that Hua Chang seemed to be uneasy. It wasn't about the master of this land, but something else. He'd always thought there was something off. He thought of all the little questions that had been piling up for a while now, and they were making him feel anxious. Soon, the group crossed through the forest, disregarding that band of insane madmen running about, and came before that haunting black building. It was then that they realized that the Nether Water Manor was in fact a large palace. Its build and make were very similar to the exquisite Wind and Water Master palaces. The palace doors were tightly shut, and after the group of them hiked up the countless steps, they stood before the gates. Shilian knocked on the doors and called out brightly, Pardon the intrusion. We have, by accident, offended bluntly. We deeply apologize. No one answered. Shilian steadied his mind and slowly pushed open the palace doors. Based on Shilian's years of experience, even if there was something inside, it wouldn't come out and greet them the moment the doors opened. Yet, he had to eat his own words. Upon first look, there was something petrifying. In the grand, spacious center of the entrance hall sat a person, and this person, dressed all in black, its face snow white, was a corpse. Instantly, Shilian soundly shut the doors. He thought, did I maybe open the doors incorrectly? Something like that shouldn't show itself so fast. He had wanted to try greeting again and start over, but Shawuru had already walked past him and pushed open the doors, humping. We've already come, he said, so what does it matter if he doesn't welcome us? The group slowly stepped into the palace and stealthily approached that skeleton dressed in black. Shilian examined it carefully and wondered, who does this corpse belong to? Why is it being worshipped here? Ming Yi knitted his brows. Wasn't General Pei left behind? He asked. Maybe it's him? That really could be a possibility. Shawuru was slightly stunned and looked it over a few more times before he refuted. It shouldn't be. The body shape of the set of bones is flatter than General Pei. Suddenly, Ching said, Wait. The group looked at him, and Ching said, Isn't the answer obvious? This is the Nether Water Manor. The only one that could be worshipped in the Nether Water Manor is naturally. Shilian understood what he wanted to say. Blackwater, demon, Shwan,